Hello everyone, welcome to the course Disability Studies in India, Historical, Social and Cultural Perspectives. So, in this module, we have been talking about how people with disabilities are represented in different religions, how they are ridiculed and how also language is playing a very important role in constructing the reality of people with disabilities. All right. So, this is what mainly we are trying to cover it up. But in the previous lecture, I discussed four important religions. One is Hinduism, Sikhism, Jainism and Buddhism. They are the four important dominant. I am not saying, when I am saying important does not mean other religions are not important. I just picked four important religions from the other important religions. All right. So, all religions are important, all communities are important. So, make sure that you do not judge me or you think that I am wrong. So, the point what I am making is that I just picked up four because I have read a little bit. It is not that I left Islam deliberately, but because I do not have a much deeper understanding of Islam, because the language is incomprehensible to me. So, this is very important that when you are reading a religion, make sure that you read deeper, then only you reach to a conclusion, and that is why you see I also in the end I said that this is what my understanding is, I am still working on it. You have to also go and read by your own, and then only you can come up with your own understanding, right. So, this is just what I am doing. It is not like I am teaching you entire disability studies in relation to other philosophies and all. I am just giving you a roadmap, right. I am just giving you a roadmap which will take you far, right. So, this is your job, is to take you the way you want. So, I can just guide, I am just guiding you, right. So, you have to explore your own with your own understanding, and that is why you see I mean every lecture is different. It has, like, obviously there is a corpus point which is covering it up, but every lecture is talking something. So, because we have a different kind of audience, and whatever interest they have, they can pick up and they can follow it up for further research and discussion. So, with this let us move to the next point where I was going to talk about disability, gender and stereotypes in India and intersectional perspectives. So, right now what I am going to do in the end of this module to bring the entire understanding of points of different lectures, that what I try to cover and what is how they intersect, right. So, as I have been telling you, it is not that disability is different, gender is different, right. Stereotypes has nothing to do with disability or gender, right. There are stereotypes. I mean, I wish if you would have been in the classroom, I would have asked you to write few stereotypes about people with disabilities or about gender, or few stereotypes about anyone or about any caste or about any culture, right. You often listen a lot of jokes in your everyday life, right. And when you listen a lot of jokes in your everyday life, how does it come from? They are stereotypical jokes, right. But stereotype, remember two things, right. There are certain positive stereotypes and there are some negative stereotypes, right. Let us say, for example, this is also a stereotype that all the people who are from IIT, they make a lot of money, right. It is not true, but it is a positive, right. It is a positive. And then there is a negative stereotype that all the people who are from arts, they are jobless, they are stupid, they do not know how to read and write. No, that is not the point. So, it is a negative stereotypes. This is same about every community, every people, every country. Let us say, for example, Germany. There is a stereotype about Germany that, like, the moment you see football, you think about Germany. This is a positive stereotype, like they are good at sports, and that is why. Let us say, for example, cricket. This is a positive stereotype. Okay, Indians are good about cricket, but there is another stereotype, poverty, right. The moment you think about poverty, you think about India, right. Our job is to question, challenge these negative stereotypes, and then only we can proceed further to think about how we can reinterpret disability and stereotype attached with them, so that we can produce a counter narrative, because until and unless you produce counter narrative, it will not help us, it will not make us and understand that they can also be questioned. Otherwise, as I told you in the previous lectures, that normal will look natural, right? Something is normal, which means natural. We have to question that alignment, right, which is looks natural alignment, that normal is natural, all right. So, let us go to the slide number 1 and see what it has to say about disability and gender, all right. So, disability in India, disability and gender are deeply interconnected and shaped by cultural, social and historical factors. The intersections of these two aspects, disability and gender, creates a unique challenge for individuals, particularly women with disabilities, who are often subjected to compounded stereotypes, discrimination and marginalization. Disability in the Indian context is not only a physical or cognitive condition, but is also shaped by socio-cultural perception, right. There is a Indian Disability Act of 1995 defines disability as a long-term physical, mental, intellectual or sensory impairment that significantly hinders the ability to perform activities of daily life. However, the lived reality of disability in India extends far beyond this legal definition. In a society where social and cultural stigma associated with disability remains prevalent, people with disabilities are often viewed as objects of pity, charity and burden, right. So, in this slide I just gave you one stereotype, that how people with disabilities are considered as a burden, right. Just give a let me give you a task, right. You go and pick up 5 people and then you ask that you have given the opportunity to travel, right, to go to some trips, and ask them that they have 4 options. The one, they have to pick up an old man for to go on the trip, and second option, they have to go with a disabled disabled person. Third option is they have to go with the able body, right, and fourth option they have that they want to go with the family, right. So, just do this homework, right, and then you see what are the people choosing. Is there anyone who has chosen old man or people with disability to go for a trip, right? Obviously, I do not think, I mean, it is my wild guess that 99% will not do so. Why? Because there is a stereotype that people with disabilities will they will become a burden on them. There is no fun on to go to the trip. They will not enjoy the trip because they are going with the people with disability and they have to take care of disabled people or old people, right. So, they will automatically reject. I mean, where did this come from, right? This comes from a stereotype that you have in your mind that people with disabilities are a burden over you, right. They are dependent, they are not independent, this idea. But let me ask you another question then, all right. Have they ever experienced this? How do they get to know this? Like, how do they get to know that people with disability are dependent and they are no fun in going with them? I am also sure 99% that they have also not experienced this, right. If suppose you have not experienced this and you have not gone on a trip with the people with disability, how do you reach to this conclusion? It is like you have been told, you have been guided, you have been narrated, you have been watched in films or literature, you have been like through that your understanding is shaped. You have not experienced. Let me share you one simple story, right, and then you will understand what I am trying to say. When I was in US and then there are a lot of students, I asked them, you should also visit India, you will love to come to India, you will, it's a fun. Then say that, do you have a McDonald's, right, do you have roads? I mean, I am scared to go there because what if people loot us? I mean, they have never come to India, they have never experienced this, but still they feel that this is what India is all about. See, it is not I am trying to say something else, but I am trying to make you understand that if you have not experienced it, my point is something else. My point is, if you have not experienced it, how do you reach to that conclusion? You reach to that conclusion because of certain stereotypes you watch in films, right? You watch in films and then you think about the place in the same way, and like, but trust me that the person, it's not right, right? Then I told him, he said, oh really? He started Googling it and he started learning about it, and then said, no, this is what I knew is wrong, that is not what right is. So, my humble suggestion, my humble opinion is that, so that boy, that girl started knowing, learning about India, and they got to know that the India that they know is different from what they had already learned from people, right? And that is why I famously say, one must unlearn before they learn, right? You must unlearn. So, this stereotypes is also about unlearning, right? This is also about learning something new which you are which you have not experienced, right? So this is what I am talking about, the stereotypes. Let us go to the next slide, please. So, in the next slide, what you see, gender in India is deeply rooted in traditional norms with rigid expectations about what constitutes masculinity and femininity. These gender norms are influenced by a complex web of cultural, religious and social practices. Men are often expected to be providers, protectors and heads of household, while women are typically associated with caregiving, domestic labor, nurturing roles. These traditional gender expectations intersect with perception of disability and creating unique challenges, especially for women, right? Okay, let me ask you a question again, right? So, there are certain roles assigned to women, right? There is obviously masculinity performs in other way, femininity performs in other way, and they are two, I mean related, I would say, because they don't go, they go side by side. So, women with disabilities have a problem if society, there are roles assigned to women. So, people think that the roles will not be performed by women with disabilities because there is another identity associated with women, that is disability. I will talk about this in detail, identity, subjectivity and all in the next module. But in this module, what I am talking about is that how women, in fact, I have a very like one entire module on gender and disability, right. So, we will discuss more in detail gender and disability in that module, but in this module what I am talking about is that the problem happens, stereotype happens more on women with disabilities because they have two identity. One, they have a women, which in patriarchal society they are always considered as a inferior, less potential to perform any task, and then second is also considered that it is also considered that they are disabled. So, another identity that they have is disabled. So, obviously, they will not be able to perform role assigned to women in a patriarchal society. So, this adds another burden on women, right. This creates another burden on women with disabilities. Another stereotypes, another prejudice. So, women are already marginalized, and what people say that people with disabilities, women with disabilities are doubly marginalized, right. So, we will talk more on this, but let us look at the next slide now. So, for women with disabilities, the intersectionality of gender and disability, it leads to compounded marginalization, right. So, while women with disabilities may face similar physical barriers to those experienced by men with disabilities, they are also subject to an additional layer of discrimination rooted in gendered expectation, right. This is what I was trying to tell you, right. This is about role that they won't be able to perform because of their disability. So, the one is obviously what men face who are disabled, right. So, these include social isolation, limited access to education and employment, restricted mobility, heightened vulnerability to abuse, the double burden of gender and disability. This creates a barrier to their full participation in society, limiting their opportunities for social, political and economic inclusion, right. So, my point is, when I am talking about like double marginalization, think for a second. Okay, one is disabled, right, a person is disabled. If a person is disabled and a woman is disabled, so disability is one identity that they both face. However, I beg to differ here, because women with disability, like a woman who is disabled, not because just a gender, right, it is also obviously gender has its own dynamics, and due to that it is not right to say that disability is same for both, is only the gender, because of the gender you have and then you get disabled is another kind of experience than a person who is disabled, right. So, this experience, this double marginalization is what I have been talking about, right. This double marginalization, because now the problem is that they won't be able to perform that role. So, what happens? That lead to another barrier in accessing education, employment opportunities, political space, and they all are restricted and not allowed to women with disabilities. Still, let us say, I am sure that many of you are listening to me, and at this point of time you think how many women with disabilities you see around in educational space, in political space, in cultural space, right, or in the employment you see, or outside the market, right, because that is a different domain where I will touch upon when I will be talking about literature, that even parents feel hesitant in taking their children, disabled children, outside, because it is a stigma for them as well. In fact, one of my research scholars is working on parents' problems, the stigma because of their impaired or disabled children, right. So, this is what you have to look into it. Let us look at the next slide now. So, in the next slide, if you see, for women, the stereotype associated with disability are even more pronounced. Indian society places a high value on women's ability to bear children and care for family, right. This is what I was explaining. So, women with disabilities are often seen as incomplete or deficient because they are unable to fulfill these traditional roles in the same way as able-bodied women. Their reproductive potential may be questioned, leading to exclusion from discussions about marriage, family and motherhood. Imagine that they are also deprived, women with disability are deprived from marriage, family and motherhood. So, they are frequently viewed as incapable of contributing to the household or community, reinforcing their status as dependent and non-productive members of society, right. So, here you see that there is another problem that women face, because people generally presume obviously that in some of societies women are respected because of their reproductive capacities, right. Imagine a woman who can give a birth, like who has given a birth to children, and a woman who is incapable or who is not able to give birth to children. Like, look at their both conditions. I can tell you that they are very different, right. So, imagine women with disabilities are viewed as if they will not be able to bear the children, and that leads to another problem for women with disabilities. So, discrimination is justified, not allowing for educational opportunities is also justified, because what will they do? They will not have a family, right. So, here you see family is important institutions, right. Family is an important institutions in the sense that what kind of behavior, what kind of person, everything comes from family. In fact, family is the first institutions which takes care of Indian citizens or any citizens of the world, right? Okay, how you will grow up, what you would like to have, what you would like not to have, right? In fact, if you look at the Marxism, in fact, the origins of the family, Frederick Engels has extensively talked about. In fact, many women, feminists have talked about this. So the point what I am talking about, that they won't be able to participate in the marriage, which will not allow them to be part of reproductive process, and therefore their marginalization is justified. Their discrimination is fine, all right. So think on these lines, where women with disabilities are treated as if their life is not worth of living. You all right? Let's go to the next slide and see. In the next slide you will see that the impact of these stereotypes on disabled women in India is profound and far-reaching. One of the most significant consequences is the social isolation experienced by disabled women, as society places higher value on able-bodied women who fulfill traditional gender roles. So women with disabilities are often excluded from public or private spheres, and this leads to what I was talking about: limited access to education, employment, healthcare, as well as social support networks that are essential for personal development and well-being, but they don't get social support network. So one data that I have picked up for you, that education, which I will be anyway talking about in the coming modules, education, which is a critical tool for social mobility, remains largely inaccessible to disabled women in India. According to 2011 census, the literacy rate among disabled women is significantly lower than that of their able-bodied counterparts, right? Look at this. This is what I wanted to bring this, why this is happening. So the lack of accessible schools, inadequate teaching materials, social prejudice against disabled individuals, they often deter disabled girls and women from pursuing education. So these prevailing stereotypes about their intellectual capabilities reinforce the perception that they are not deserving of education or training. All right. So this census, if you see that, that's why I ask you to look at around and see if people with disabilities, in terms like women with disabilities, are getting education or not, what is their condition, what is their status, how they are being viewed, how they are being treated, right? And you will see that in terms of men with disabilities, women with disabilities are less in numbers in terms of education, educational opportunities, any political opportunities, or any space that they access. Why is it so? Obviously, because as I said, they are doubly marginalized. One, they are women anyway are still less in numbers in terms of education opportunities, allowing them not to study because of, like I am sure that if you, in fact in IIT, if you see, I mean there has been very my quite concern, and I visited many IITs just to see the number of girls, and then I found that in IIT JEE mains exam there is a reservation, and sometimes it's difficult to find a good candidate who can fill up the seats, right. So the point what I am talking about is that despite certain measures, taken to educate women in higher institutions, still we have people less in numbers, right. Still we have women less in numbers. Why is it so? Right? Think about it. Is a cultural barriers, right? Even if we have educational opportunities, then we have cultural barriers, right? So that's another concern that I am talking about. So think about this kind of concern. Let's look at the next slide, please. So to challenge the stereotypes and discrimination faced by women with disabilities in India, a more inclusive and equitable approach is required. This approach must address both disability and gender-based discrimination simultaneously, recognizing the unique needs and challenges of disabled women. There is a legal framework such as Right of Person with Disability Act, It provides important protection for disabled individuals, but greater implementation and awareness are needed to address the intersectional nature of discrimination. So, there are awareness campaigns that challenge social stereotypes and promote positive representations of women with disabilities that can help change public attitudes. So, these campaigns should highlight the agency, capabilities and contribution of disabled women that will break down harmful stereotypes about their worth and potential. Disability inclusive education and employment policies are also essential to provide disabled women with opportunities and support they need to succeed in society, right. So, what I have been talking about, what I have been discussing in terms of gender and disability is that first and foremost we should challenge those stereotypes. We should question those stereotypes and then only we can provide them proper ample opportunities for education and also a kind of equitable society which will help them to understand society in a better way. So, look at the last slide of this lecture please. So, in this slide if you see I am talking about how to create a more inclusive society. It is essential to challenge these stereotypes, that is what I was talking about, right. First and foremost is to challenge and then provide disabled women with the tools and opportunities they need to thrive. Legal reforms, inclusive education, employment policies, awareness campaigns are all necessary to combat the systematic discrimination that disabled women face. By working toward an inclusive and equitable future, we can ensure, India can ensure women with disabilities are recognized not for their limitations, right. This is basically a stereotype that we have about women with disability, but for their strength, contribution and potential, right. So, to conclude my lecture I would say that it depends how we are challenging those stereotypes, how we are creating potential opportunities for women with disabilities and the stigma that they carry, right. How we can produce a counter narrative against those stigma which can challenge that they are dependent, they are burdened, they are not potential, they cannot have proper educations or reproductive capacities since they are disabled. So, these unnecessarily negative association with women with disabilities has to be challenged, critiqued and reinterpreted. All right. So, with this I would like to end my lecture. Thank you so much for your patient listening to me and see you next time in the next module. We will talk something new. Thank you so much.